Some goodbyes are not the end of a story. They are the moment the truth finally finds its voice. The courtroom in Helena, Montana, had never been so quiet. Even the old clock above the judge's bench seemed to hesitate between each tick, as if time itself understood that something far heavier than a legal decision was about to unfold. Rows of polished oak benches were filled with strangers, reporters, courthouse staff, and veterans wearing faded service pins on their jackets. Outside, a light spring rain tapped softly against the tall windows, leaving silver trails across the glass while gray clouds dimmed the afternoon sun. Inside, every pair of eyes rested on one man standing alone at the defense table. Ethan Walker, 41, a former United States Marine with weathered shoulders and short brown hair touched by streaks of gray, kept both hands folded tightly in front of him. His blue eyes looked tired in the way only years of carrying invisible burdens could make them. The wrinkles around them had not come from age alone. They came from sleepless nights, memories that refused to stay buried, and silence that had become easier than explaining pain no one else could see. Across the room, behind a secured gate, sat a German shepherd with a sable coat darkened by the dim courtroom lights. Rex remained perfectly still. His ears stood alert, but his amber eyes never wandered. They stayed fixed on Ethan with the quiet devotion that had survived years, distance, and circumstances neither of them had ever chosen. The bailiff adjusted a stack of documents. Someone in the back row cleared a throat. A camera shutter clicked once before falling silent again. The judge lowered his reading glasses and looked toward Ethan. "Mr. Walker, before I issue the court's decision, do you have anything further to say?" Ethan swallowed hard. For several seconds, no words came. He simply glanced toward Rex, and the dog responded with the smallest movement of his tail, almost too subtle for anyone else to notice. Finally, Ethan lifted his head. His voice was calm, respectful, and somehow more heartbreaking because it never cracked. "Your Honor, I'm not asking for another chance. I'm not asking anyone to change their mind. I only have one request." The courtroom became so still that the distant rumble of thunder outside sounded strangely close. Ethan drew one slow breath. "May I say goodbye to my dog?" A murmur rippled through the gallery before fading just as quickly. One reporter slowly lowered her notebook. An elderly veteran in the second row removed his cap and held it against his chest. Even the bailiff seemed uncertain whether to continue breathing. The judge studied Ethan for a long moment before giving a slow nod. "You may." The side gate opened with the soft metallic sound of an old lock releasing. Rex rose without hesitation. He did not bark. He did not pull against the leash. He walked with steady confidence across the polished wooden floor, every step measured, every movement gentle, until only a few feet separated him from the man who had once trusted him with his life. No one in the courtroom understood why the sight of one aging Marine and one silent German shepherd suddenly felt too sacred to interrupt. They believed they were about to witness a final farewell. None of them knew that within the next few minutes, everything they believed about this case, and about the extraordinary bond between a soldier and his dog, would be turned completely upside down. As Rex stopped only inches away, Ethan slowly lowered himself to one knee, ignoring the polished hardwood beneath him. The German shepherd leaned forward until his nose rested gently against Ethan's trembling hand. Neither of them moved after that. It was the kind of silence that carried years inside it. Someone in the gallery quietly wiped away tears, believing they were witnessing the final chapter of a friendship that had already endured more than most people ever would. But long before lawyers, court records, and newspaper headlines ever connected their names, their story had begun beneath an entirely different sky. 7 years earlier, the first light of dawn stretched across Camp Pendleton, California, painting the training grounds in soft shades of gold and gray. The cool ocean breeze carried the scent of salt, fresh earth, and eucalyptus trees that lined the distant hills. Young Marines moved across the parade grounds with practiced discipline, while instructors called commands that echoed through the crisp morning air. Staff Sergeant Ethan Walker had just returned from another overseas deployment. At 34, he carried himself with quiet confidence rather than pride. His uniform was spotless, but the small scars along his hands revealed years of service that no medals could fully explain. He had earned the respect of every Marine under his command because he never asked anyone to do what he would not do himself. Still, there was one assignment he had never expected to receive. A kennel master waved him toward the military working dog facility near the edge of the base. Inside, rows of clean kennels lined the building, filled with disciplined German shepherds trained for detection, patrol, and search operations. Most stood alert as handlers walked past. One dog, however, remained completely still. His sable coat shimmered beneath the morning sunlight, filtering through the chain-link fencing. His amber eyes followed Ethan without fear or excitement, only quiet curiosity. The kennel master smiled faintly. That one has been waiting for the right partner. We call him Rex. Ethan stepped closer and crouched without saying a word. Rex rose slowly and approached the fence until only the steel barrier separated them. Instead of barking, the dog simply tilted his head, studying the Marine with remarkable patience. Ethan extended one hand through the opening. Rex sniffed it carefully before pressing his muzzle into Ethan's palm with calm certainty. The kennel master chuckled softly. Well, that settles it faster than usual. Ethan looked up with a puzzled smile. What do you mean? He has refused every handler for 3 weeks. Some dogs choose their partners before the paperwork does. Over the following months, their bond grew stronger than anyone expected. They trained before sunrise, running mile after mile through coastal trails, climbing obstacle courses together, and learning to trust each other's smallest movements. Ethan rarely needed to give a verbal command because Rex seemed to understand subtle gestures, changing expressions, and even silence itself. By the end of their certification, instructors often joked that watching them work was like watching two old friends finish each other's thoughts. Ethan laughed whenever he heard it, but deep inside he knew something unusual had happened. Rex was never simply following commands. Somehow, from the very beginning, the dog had been watching over him in ways no training manual could ever explain. The years that followed carried them far beyond the familiar hills of Southern California and into places where every sunrise felt borrowed. From quiet desert mornings to mountain villages wrapped in mist, Ethan and Rex learned to read the world together with a trust that grew stronger every season. They shared long patrols beneath endless skies, watched children wave from dusty roads, and spent countless evenings sitting outside temporary barracks while the scent of fresh coffee drifted through the cool air. Whenever the day finally ended, Ethan would remove his gloves, scratch behind Rex's ears, and whisper the same words. Good work today, partner. Rex always answered the same way, leaning quietly against Ethan's leg as though reminding him that neither of them had ever faced anything alone. Fellow Marines often smiled at the sight because the German shepherd seemed to understand emotions before commands. If Ethan laughed, Rex relaxed. If Ethan grew thoughtful, Rex stayed closer. If exhaustion settled across the camp after long hours, Rex would rest nearby, without taking his eyes off the man he had chosen years before. Their reputation spread throughout the unit. Younger Marines joked that if someone wanted to find Staff Sergeant Walker, they only needed to look for the German shepherd first. Yet service eventually asks every soldier to surrender something. After nearly 2 decades in uniform, Ethan returned home for the final time, carrying memories that refused to remain overseas. The small house he rented outside Helena looked peaceful from the street, surrounded by tall pine trees and a weathered wooden fence. Songbirds greeted each morning, and neighbors waved politely whenever they passed. But inside those walls, silence often stretched for hours. Ethan struggled to sleep through the night. Some mornings he sat on the front porch before sunrise with a steaming mug of black coffee growing cold in his hands while Rex rested quietly beside him, his warm shoulder pressed against Ethan's boot. There were days when words felt impossible, yet Rex never demanded them. He simply stayed. Slowly, life began finding its rhythm again. Ethan volunteered at a local veterans center, repaired old furniture for neighbors, and spent afternoons hiking forest trails with Rex through the rolling hills outside town. Children frequently stopped to pet the handsome German shepherd, and Rex greeted every gentle hand with calm patience. Many people believed they had left their hardest days behind. Then one cool October afternoon, everything changed with startling speed. Ethan had taken Rex to a community park where families gathered beneath brilliant red and golden maple trees. A charity event filled the walking paths with music, food trucks, and local vendors. Laughter drifted through the crisp air while fallen leaves crunched beneath countless footsteps. Rex remained calmly at Ethan's side until his ears suddenly lifted toward a commotion near the edge of the crowd. An elderly man, startled by an unexpected noise from a collapsing display tent caught in a sudden gust of wind, stumbled backward and lost his balance. Acting on instinct born from years of protective training, Rex moved quickly toward the frightened man, placing himself between the falling fabric and the stranger. The confusion lasted only seconds before volunteers secured the loose frame and helped everyone back to safety. No one suffered serious harm, yet several frightened witnesses misunderstood what they had seen. By evening, rumors spread far faster than facts. Someone described Rex as aggressive. Another claimed the dog had frightened people without reason. Within days, official complaints were filed, investigations began, and Ethan found himself standing before authorities trying to explain a moment that had unfolded too quickly for fear to remember accurately. For the first time since leaving military service, he realized that the bond which had protected so many lives might now be the very thing placed on trial. The weeks before the hearing passed with an unbearable slowness that made every ordinary morning feel strangely precious. Frost settled across Ethan's front lawn before sunrise, sparkling like scattered glass beneath the first rays of autumn light. Inside the small house, the familiar rhythm that had carried him through the years quietly disappeared. Rex was no longer sleeping beside the front door. His leash still hung from the wooden hook in the hallway. His favorite blue rubber ball remained beneath the kitchen table exactly where he had left it. Even the stainless steel water bowl reflected an emptiness that Ethan could not bring himself to change. Every afternoon, he drove nearly 40 miles to the county animal holding facility, hoping for another short visit. The staff members knew him by name now. They watched the former Marine arrive carrying the same worn canvas bag filled with a folded blanket, a tennis ball, and small homemade dog treats that often had to remain unopened because the rules changed from day to day. Some visits lasted 15 minutes. Others ended before they even began. Still, Ethan came without complaint. When he was finally allowed inside the quiet visitation room, Rex always stood the instant he heard Ethan's footsteps in the hallway. His ears lifted. His tail moved slowly. He never barked. He simply waited with the patient confidence of someone who never doubted that the person he loved would return. Ethan would kneel beside the chain-link dividers separating them, pressing one hand gently against the cool metal while Rex rested his muzzle against the opposite side. Neither of them seemed interested in toys or treats anymore. Being close was enough. On one rainy afternoon, Ethan's attorney, Margaret Collins, arrived carrying a thick folder filled with witness statements and legal documents. She had spent more than 20 years practicing law in Montana and rarely allowed emotion to cloud her judgment. Yet as she watched the silent exchange between the man and the German shepherd, even she struggled to maintain her usual professional distance. After the visit ended, they sat together beneath the courthouse awning while rain tapped softly against the concrete sidewalk. Margaret opened the folder slowly before speaking. "I want you to be prepared for every possibility." Ethan stared toward the gray sky without answering. "Some of the statements are not in our favor," she continued gently. "Fear changes memories. People become convinced they saw things that happened differently." Ethan nodded once. "I know." Margaret hesitated before asking the question she had been avoiding for days. "If the ruling goes against us, is there anything you would like me to request from the court?" Ethan remained silent for several moments. Passing cars hissed across the wet pavement, while distant church bells echoed through downtown Helena. Finally, he looked down at the old military dog tag resting in his palm, turning it over with his thumb as though searching for courage inside the worn metal. "I do not need another speech," he said quietly. "I do not need another appeal." His voice remained steady, but his eyes revealed the weight he had been carrying alone. "I only want enough time to tell him he was never abandoned." Margaret lowered her gaze. For the first time in her career, she found herself unable to answer immediately. She simply closed the folder and rested it beside her. Across town, unseen by either of them, another person carefully reviewed photographs, reports, and recordings connected to the incident in the park. One small detail continued to bother him. Something in the official timeline did not fit. He could not yet explain why. But the more he examined the evidence, the more convinced he became that an important piece of the truth had been overlooked. While Ethan prepared himself for what he believed would be the hardest goodbye of his life, The first quiet crack in the case had already begun to appear. Back in the courtroom, the silence felt almost sacred. Ethan kept one hand resting gently against Rex's neck, his fingers slowly brushing through the thick sable fur that had grown lighter around the muzzle with age. For a long moment, neither of them seemed aware of the people surrounding them. The judge waited. The attorneys remained seated. Even the reporters forgot to write. It was as though everyone had become an unexpected witness to something that could never be entered into the official record. Ethan smiled faintly through tired eyes. "You remember the beach at Pendleton?" he whispered. Rex lifted his head ever so slightly. "You hated the waves at first. Then one day you decided every seagull belonged to you." A few quiet chuckles drifted through the gallery before fading into silence once again. Ethan continued speaking, not to the courtroom, but only to the dog who had shared the better part of his adult life. "You stayed with me when everyone thought I was stronger than I really was. You sat outside my bedroom every night after I came home. You never asked why I could not sleep. You just stayed." Rex leaned closer until his forehead rested softly against Ethan's shoulder. The movement was so gentle that it looked less like training and more like love remembered. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, but he did not wipe them away. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I could protect a lot of people. I just could not protect you from this." The words settled heavily across the room. Margaret Collins quietly lowered her gaze. The elderly veteran in the second row pressed both hands together as though offering a silent prayer. Near the back of the courtroom, a young deputy who had escorted Rex inside blinked several times before looking away toward the windows, pretending to study the rain that continued to fall outside. Ethan slowly reached into the inside pocket of his worn jacket and removed an old military dog tag attached to a faded chain. Time had dulled its edges, but one side still reflected enough light to catch Rex's attention. The German shepherd sniffed it carefully before gently touching it with his nose, exactly as he had done hundreds of times over the years. Ethan smiled again. "You always knew this sound." He let the metal tag hang loosely from his fingers, and it produced a soft, familiar click against his wedding band. The tiny sound echoed through memories only the two of them shared. Rex's ears lifted immediately. His amber eyes brightened with quiet recognition, and his tail gave one slow sweep across the polished floor. Several people exchanged puzzled glances. They had expected panic, sadness, or confusion. Instead, they were watching absolute trust. The bailiff stepped forward respectfully. "Sir, it is almost time." Ethan nodded without looking away from Rex. He wrapped both arms around the German shepherd one final time and rested his forehead against the dog's. "Thank you for bringing me home," he whispered. "Every single time." As the deputy reached for the leash, Rex calmly stood. He took 2 obedient steps toward the exit, then suddenly stopped. His ears became rigid. His nose lifted into the still air. Every muscle in his body grew perfectly still. He was no longer focused on Ethan. Instead, his eyes locked onto someone seated quietly near the rear corner of the courtroom. The warmth that had filled the room only seconds before vanished beneath a wave of uneasy curiosity. Ethan recognized that expression instantly. He had seen it countless times before. Rex had noticed something that no one else had yet seen. Rex did not growl. He did not lunge. He simply stood frozen, his ears pointed toward the back corner of the courtroom while his nose worked quietly, drawing in the air with slow, deliberate breaths. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. He knew that posture better than he knew his own reflection. It was the same silent alert Rex had given countless times whenever something felt wrong, long before anyone else noticed. The deputy holding the leash frowned and gave it a gentle tug. "Come on, boy." Rex did not move. His amber eyes never left the man seated near the rear aisle, a middle-aged spectator wearing a dark gray jacket and a navy baseball cap pulled low across his forehead. He had remained almost invisible throughout the hearing, never speaking, never reacting, quietly blending into the crowd. Yet now he shifted uncomfortably beneath the unwavering gaze of the German shepherd. A whisper traveled through the gallery. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Is everything all right?" Before anyone could answer, Rex took one slow step sideways. Not toward the exit, toward the rows of spectators. The deputy instinctively tightened his grip, but the movement remained calm and controlled. Ethan slowly rose to his feet. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Do not pull him." Margaret Collins looked at him in surprise. "Why?" Ethan never looked away from Rex. Because he is trying to tell us something. The room fell silent once more. Even the rain outside seemed softer now, as though the entire courthouse were holding its breath. The man in the gray jacket adjusted the leather messenger bag resting beside his chair and forced a nervous smile. "Is there a problem?" he asked politely. Rex answered by sitting perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the bag. No barking, no panic, only complete certainty. Ethan felt a familiar chill travel through him. During their years together, Rex had learned that barking was not always the answer. Sometimes the strongest warning was absolute silence. The judge exchanged a glance with the county sheriff seated near the front row. "Deputy Harris," the judge said calmly, "would you mind speaking with the gentleman for a moment?" The man immediately raised both hands. "Of course, I have nothing to hide." His voice sounded friendly enough, yet a bead of perspiration slowly formed near his temple despite the cool temperature inside the courtroom. Deputy Harris approached respectfully. "Sir, would you mind setting your bag on the bench?" "Certainly." The man placed it down with careful hands. Rex's ears lifted even higher. Ethan noticed another detail that no one else seemed to recognize. Rex was not watching the man anymore. He was watching only the bag. Margaret quietly leaned closer to Ethan. "What do you think he smells?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "I do not know, but whatever it is, he has smelled it before." Deputy Harris slowly opened the outer pocket. Inside were ordinary items. A notebook, reading glasses, a bottle of water. Nothing unusual. Several people released quiet breaths of relief. The man even managed a faint laugh. "I told you." Then Rex lowered his nose slightly and gave one soft whine. Ethan's eyes widened. That sound was even rarer than a bark. Rex made it only when something important remained hidden. Deputy Harris paused. He reached deeper into the bag, feeling beneath the inner lining where his fingers brushed against an object that should not have been there. His expression changed instantly. Without saying a word, he carefully removed a small black flash drive sealed inside a clear evidence pouch, bearing an official county identification label. The courtroom erupted in stunned murmurs. Margaret stared at the pouch in disbelief. The judge slowly removed his glasses. Across the room, the man in the gray jacket no longer looked invisible. For the first time since entering the courthouse, fear replaced the confidence on his face, while Rex quietly lowered his head, as though his part in revealing the truth had only just begun. No one spoke as Deputy Harris carefully handed the sealed evidence pouch to the judge. The tiny black flash drive looked almost insignificant resting on the polished wooden bench, yet every person in the courtroom sensed that the atmosphere had changed. Moments earlier they had believed the hearing was reaching its conclusion. Now it felt as though it had only just begun. The county prosecutor rose slowly. "Your Honor, I was not aware this evidence existed." The judge nodded without taking his eyes off the pouch. Neither was the court. Margaret Collins stood quietly beside Ethan, her thoughts racing. Then she remembered the investigator who had called her late the previous evening, insisting that several details in the case did not match the official reports. He had promised to attend the hearing if he found proof. Her eyes drifted toward the back of the courtroom, but the seat where he had been sitting was now empty. Deputy Harris connected the flash drive to the courtroom computer while everyone watched the large monitor mounted beside the judge's bench. After a brief pause, a folder appeared on the screen labeled simply, "Community Park Security Backup." The courtroom technician opened the first file. Grainy security footage filled the monitor. The familiar autumn festival appeared from an angle no witness statements had ever mentioned. Children wandered between food stands. Families laughed beneath colorful maple trees. Ethan and Rex entered the frame exactly as everyone remembered. Then, seconds later, a strong gust of wind swept across the park. The unstable display tent shifted suddenly toward a narrow walking path where the elderly man had paused. Before anyone nearby reacted, Rex moved quickly toward him. The video continued from the overhead angle, revealing something none of the previous recordings had captured. Rex did not rush toward the man. He positioned himself between the falling tent frame and the startled visitor, gently redirecting the frightened man backward while volunteers secured the collapsing structure. There was no sign of aggression, no attack, no uncontrolled behavior. Only calm protective instinct performed within seconds. A quiet gasp swept across the courtroom. The prosecutor leaned closer to the screen. "Continue." The next clip showed another camera from the opposite side of the park. A woman who had filed one of the strongest complaints could now be seen arriving several moments after the entire incident had already ended. Her statement had described events she could not possibly have witnessed firsthand. Another recording confirmed the same timeline. Then came a final document stored beside the videos. It contained internal emails showing that one backup security system had malfunctioned on the day investigators requested footage, leaving these files archived separately and never included in the original evidence package. Margaret slowly closed her eyes with relief. The missing piece had never been destroyed. It had simply never reached the courtroom until now. The judge removed his glasses and looked toward Ethan before turning to the prosecutor. Based upon this newly discovered evidence, the court cannot rely upon the previous factual findings. His voice remained calm, yet every word carried unmistakable weight. This hearing is hereby suspended pending immediate review of the complete record. Across the room, the man who had carried the flash drive quietly lowered his head. He stood and addressed the court for the first time. "My name is Daniel Brooks. I maintain security systems for the park. I discovered the archived files only 2 nights ago during a routine equipment inspection. I realized the wrong conclusion had been reached, and I could not allow that mistake to remain." Ethan looked toward Rex, who finally relaxed, his ears softening as his tail gave one gentle sweep across the courtroom floor. It was almost as if he had known all along that the truth had never disappeared. It had only been waiting for someone willing to find it. 3 days later, the courthouse filled once again, but everything about the room felt different. The same oak benches stood beneath the same high ceiling. The same rain clouds drifted beyond the tall windows. Yet the uncertainty that had weighed upon every face had quietly given way to hope. Ethan arrived early, dressed in the same neatly pressed navy suit he had worn before, though this time his shoulders seemed lighter. He carried no expectations beyond hearing the truth spoken aloud. Rex entered beside Deputy Harris with calm confidence, his sable coat brushed until it gleamed beneath the soft courtroom lights. The moment the German shepherd spotted Ethan, his tail began to sway with slow, joyful certainty. The judge called the session to order and reviewed the newly admitted evidence one final time. Every statement was compared against the security recordings. Every timeline was carefully corrected. Every overlooked detail found its proper place. When the review ended, the judge folded his hands and looked directly toward Ethan. "Mr. Walker, this court finds that the previous conclusions were based upon incomplete evidence. The newly discovered recordings clearly demonstrate that Rex acted to protect a member of the public during an unexpected emergency. The court further finds no basis to classify this dog as dangerous under Montana law." A quiet wave of relief swept through the room. Margaret Collins closed her eyes for a brief moment before smiling through tears she no longer tried to hide. Daniel Brooks lowered his head, grateful that the evidence had arrived before it was too late. Even the prosecutor offered a respectful nod toward Ethan, acknowledging that justice had been served through facts rather than pride. The judge continued, "Effective immediately, Rex is released into the care of his lawful owner." Deputy Harris slowly unclipped the leash. There was no command, no encouragement. None was needed. Rex crossed the courtroom with measured steps until he reached Ethan. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at one another. Years of shared mornings, endless training runs, quiet conversations on lonely porches, and every silent promise they had ever made seemed to exist within that single glance. Ethan knelt once more, but this time there was no sorrow in the movement. Rex rested both front paws gently against Ethan's shoulders before leaning into him with complete trust. Ethan wrapped his arms around the German shepherd, burying his face against the familiar warmth of his neck. "We are going home," he whispered. "This time together." Rex answered with a soft, contented sigh that seemed to release every anxious mile they had walked apart. No applause broke the silence. Somehow clapping would have diminished the moment. Instead, people simply stood. The elderly veteran placed his cap over his heart once again. A young reporter quietly lowered her camera because she realized that some memories belonged first to the people living them. Deputy Harris smiled to himself while opening the courthouse doors. Sunlight poured through the entrance at last, washing away the gray tones that had filled the building all morning. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sidewalks shimmered beneath fresh light, and the scent of wet pine drifted gently across the courthouse steps. Ethan clipped Rex's familiar leather leash onto his collar, although the old Marine knew he probably did not need it. Some bonds had never depended on leather, chains, or commands. They had always been built upon trust. Side by side, the former Marine and his faithful German shepherd stepped into the quiet Montana afternoon, leaving behind not only the courthouse, but the misunderstanding that had nearly separated two hearts that had already spent a lifetime bringing each other safely home. In the months that followed, life settled into a quieter rhythm than either Ethan or Rex had known in years. The little house beneath the Montana pines slowly felt like home again. Every morning began the same way. Before the sun climbed above the hills, Ethan stepped onto the front porch carrying a steaming mug of black coffee while Rex settled beside him, watching the woods awaken. The scent of damp earth drifted through the cool air, robins filled the branches with gentle songs, and the first rays of light painted the valley in soft shades of gold. There were no cameras waiting outside, no reporters asking questions, no court dates written on the calendar. Only ordinary mornings that somehow felt extraordinary because they had almost been lost. Word of what had happened quietly spread through the community. Veterans from across the county began stopping by the small woodworking shop where Ethan volunteered several afternoons each week. Some came to have an old chair repaired. Others came simply to shake his hand. They often found Rex lying peacefully near the entrance, greeting every visitor with the same calm kindness that had always defined him. Children especially loved him. Ethan smiled each time he watched little hands gently stroke the German shepherd's thick fur, remembering how close the world had come to misunderstanding a heart built entirely upon loyalty. One Saturday, the local elementary school invited Ethan to speak during a community safety event. He accepted only after learning that Rex could come too. Standing before dozens of families gathered beneath bright blue skies, Ethan spoke quietly about responsibility, trust, and patience. He never described himself as a hero. He never blamed anyone for what had happened. Instead, he looked toward Rex and said, "The greatest partners are the ones who stay beside you even when the world has stopped believing." The audience remained silent for several seconds before warm applause rolled across the schoolyard. Some parents wiped away tears while their children hugged their own dogs a little tighter. As autumn slowly gave way to winter, fresh snow covered the trails where Ethan and Rex had walked together for years. Their footprints stretched side by side across the untouched white landscape, just as they always had. Nothing about them seemed remarkable from a distance. One man, one dog, two quiet figures disappearing into the pines beneath a pale morning sky. Yet anyone who knew their story understood they were looking at something rare. Not perfection, not luck, simply a promise kept. On Christmas Eve, Ethan opened a small wooden box resting on the mantel above his fireplace. Inside lay the old military dog tag that Rex had recognized in the courtroom. He held it for a moment before gently fastening it beside Rex's collar, where it rested with a soft metallic click. Rex looked up, his amber eyes warm with the same peaceful trust that had carried them through every chapter of their journey. Ethan smiled and whispered, "Home." Outside, snowflakes drifted quietly beneath the porch light, covering the world in peaceful silence. Some people believe miracles arrive with thunder, impossible odds, or headlines that everyone remembers. But sometimes the greatest miracle is far quieter. Sometimes it is found in the unwavering eyes of a faithful friend who refuses to stop believing until the truth finally catches up. And perhaps that is the lesson neither Ethan nor Rex ever needed to say out loud. Loyalty asks for nothing. It simply stays. It waits. It forgives. It walks beside us through every season, every misunderstanding, and every storm until grace arrives, often more quietly than we ever expected. In the end, justice restored a name, but love had protected two souls long before any courtroom ever could.